So next up is the panel discussion. So hi, I'm Satty Bhens from McKinsey, and delighted to have three guests talk about the implications of microservices, the business implications. So I'm going to start by asking each of our panelists to introduce themselves, and then I'll moderate with some questions, but then we'll open it up for everybody to ask questions too. So let's, Pascal, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Pascal. I work for Thomas Cook, one of the biggest leisure companies. We are around 22,000 people, 600 IT, and we serve around 22 million customers a year. Within innovation and the digital lab space, I'm responsible actually to bring ideas to life and to actually get them into the normal flow and to be disruptive where possible. Because it's a very disruptive environment. Travel industry, we've been a bit behind in what's going on. Airbnb and others came up, and therefore we have to follow and we have to be innovative. So that's it.
Amit?
Thank you. Yeah, Amit Maimon. I lead the product innovation group for ADP. We're actually right upstairs here on the 4th and 5th floors. It's a new group that was formed in the last year and a half, and the HR or HCM, human capital space, is going through massive transition. I'm sure some of you have heard of the Zenefits $500 million round, namely raised $45 million, Zen payroll. So it's becoming a very hot space. And so our role is to build the next generations of platform and products within ADP, which requires changing a lot of the way ADP does things. One of the major initiatives that's going on right now is breaking apart our big monolith platform into services and microservices. So actively going on right now in the 5th floor. And my background is from entrepreneurship, built and sold a few companies, and strategic consulting at McKinsey in the business technology group. So different areas from low to the ground kind of execution to more of let's look at general overall strategy. And I hope we can help you kind of sell this within your organization because you need the support to do this type of initiative.
How's it going? I'm Travell Perkins from Fidelity. I've been in financial services for 15 plus years, and places like State Street and also Fidelity and large enterprises like Johnson & Johnson. Also dabbled in startups as well. So I joined Fidelity about 3 years ago and was CTO of a product called FidSafe. We experimented with a lot of things there that were new. The cloud, AWS, Node.js, microservices, obviously, and rich clients. So I think for Fidelity, we have quite the presence for our B2B customers and also B2C customers. I'm the VP of Web Architecture in our personal investing division. So that's most of you guys are familiar with PI as a brand, and we're working on something called Digital Platform, which is our microservices strategy. So I lead the Digital Platform Client Services part of that. So complementary to microservices is what you're seeing in terms of the web and mobile space, the sort of resurgence of client-side technology to integrate with various back-end services. So that's what I do in a nutshell.
Cool. Thanks all. So this morning you heard from three pretty much cloud natives, and so they didn't have to go through all the challenges of getting kind of funding and investments to build new architectures in the cloud. And so I think some of the things that you'll hear about here is how do you get an existing organization with an existing set of enterprise IT, how do you convince your boss or your business to flip the switch and move to microservices. So the first question for this team is, for this group is, how do you create a case from going from whatever you have today to a microservices architecture? And maybe I'm close to Amit right now, so I know what it's going through. Maybe I'll start with you.
Sure. It's not easy because I think it depends on your company. The question is, what is people's base level of understanding? How close are they to technology in general? What I found is that many times people think about economics of scale. So if Satty, you build a factory and I build a big factory, let's build one big factory and we have one security guard and one fence, and so it's cheaper to just build one big thing. And I think in software we know there's almost this economics of scale. You try to get a large group of developers working in one code base, everyone steps over one another, the builds break, and nothing works. But how do you explain it to less technological people? One example which worked for me is I told them, imagine you're 50 people building a massive slide deck, and everyone gets to make changes everywhere you want in the slides. And then you try to merge the slide every day at the end of the day. Imagine that mess. And then you see people starting to kind of, oh, is that what's happening in the development team? So I think stage one is to get people to understand why you can't add above, I don't know, 15 and maybe 20, even that's way too large in my mind, developers building one thing together. I think when you get to that place and you see kind of the shock and horror, and you get to the place where you can get them to realize, oh my God, I didn't even understand that that's the way these things are done. It's hugely inefficient. You won most of the fight. And now it's about describing, OK, here's what needs to happen. And before you get to the word microservices or service-oriented architecture, it's more about having a mental picture for them that is about accountability of deliverables, where you say, if I own my code base, I care about it being clean. I care about it working well. If everybody owns everything, then you can't actually achieve much. I started to have the saying, divide and empower, like divide and conquer, but divide and empower, because, again, old companies, they like to talk about empowerment and engagement, but you can't actually do that if everyone is on hold on the build train, or you have a best team that delivers amazing results, but it's accountability and level of success is only as good as the worst team. So that is the starting point. I think it's a hard question, but first have folks understand and have simple sound bites about what this means before you go into any of the technical details. And then there's multiple levels depending on how much you get them there.
Travell, do you want to add to that? Or share your story?
Sure. I think it depends on scale, really, and stakeholders. So when it comes to convincing the business, the people ultimately going to pay for the work, usually I find that that's not necessarily the challenge. It depends on how greenfield you are. If you have a seasoned operational team, they could be excellent, but if they do things a particular way, that might not fit well with microservices, frankly. As you guys know, they're based on source control tools and artifact management. It's easy to disassemble a code base and slice it up among a team. The real issue that makes microservices different in practice is really comes in at deployment time. Challenges like service discovery, dynamic service discovery, handling multiple versions, wiring, basically wiring things together and deploying them in little itty bitty bits. So if you normally teams are used to deploying even web-focused businesses, right? They're used to deploying a version, maybe being able to roll back to another version, but basically that simple pace of pushing new functionality out, that's one thing. But when you're talking about for just a simple application, now you've doubled the operational work, right? Or tripled the operational work. It depends on how many microservices you have. You could have 12 microservices that constitute an application, and then there may be dozens underneath that those core services to represent the application depend on. That's really what microservices looks like when Richard's talking about a tree and basically measuring your message throughput, seeing the difference in message throughput as a mechanism for identifying an issue. That really comes into practice. And your ops team or your DevOps team, ideally, is either going to be ready to accommodate that or not. So, like if they're used to deploying monoliths and stuff like that, I found in practice in large enterprise that it all comes down to the tools from a practical perspective in operations. So there are other complementary technologies like containers, Docker, Kubernetes, Mesosphere, various things of that nature, basically process scheduling and service discovery that either make or break your strategy for deploying microservices. From the top management perspective, I mean, they're going to love it, right? They're going to love the results if you have a solid implementation. But operationally, you're going to experience your pain there first.
Thanks. Just a quick question, by the way, for the audience. How many people here, show your hands if you're in a startup right now, in a greenfield environment? And one, I thought, two. How many on an existing enterprise with kind of legacy infrastructure and operations? And all right, over to you, Pascal. I think
Actually, I don't think you sell microservices. Actually, I think you sell a solution to a problem. So it's more about how do you actually describe the problem and get then the right attraction from the stakeholders and the C-level to actually introduce what you want to do. So that was, for me, one of the first steps. And I actually looked at Thomas Cook, and one of the main questions, which I personally had, was how do I actually know that the products which we're selling are the right products? Are that the products where our customers are looking for? So I was mainly looking at how can I actually present something. I wanted to do something with microservices because I believed in the fact that we currently do A/B testing, multivariance testing, and everything on front end, which is quite easily, and even C-level understands that very well. How can I actually prove that I can do the same deeper into the stack? Taking in account that we're still using mainframes, that there is still COBOL around. There is a variance of different solution stacks going from COBOL, Java applications, .NET, etc. How do I actually start bringing that all together and show to the C-level, this is what we have to do because we have to change, we have to be disruptive. So we built a prototype in almost a month and a half where we did like a free text kind of search. We built it very small services where every service was responsible for just doing one thing, but doing that one thing well. And then I started showing it to certain people, very selective into the business. Product owners, even some of the financial people were like looking, hey, this looks cool. So we did quite some UI design on it to make it very attractive and actually started a bit of marketing around it. Created a bit of a hype, but didn't give access to anybody. At a certain moment, there was a question, hey, what are you doing? Yeah, we're building something. And then I got a slot to talk on the board to actually show what we're doing. I said, like, yes, that's fine. I'm happy to present what we're doing, but only if I'm allowed to talk 10 minutes about technology. So we made a deal. I gave a talk, I showed what was possible, came up with some nice business ideas which we had out of tech, but we also talked about the services and how we had broken down everything in very small problems and what were the opportunities to actually switch. And that's how actually the ball came to rolling, and how we created actually a digital labs environment within Thomas Cook.
Yeah, I think it also reminds me of the thing you have to remember is the with it, what's in it for them, right? It's not what's in it for you. That's clear to all of us, and I think we landed on a few things. One is, and you have to figure out the executives or the sponsor, what will they care about? So we landed on a few. Like one is faster feature development, right? Because you are able to develop separately. The second is you also get better operational efficiencies once you do the tooling, right? You're able to scale one microservice at a time. It's cheaper. The third, and this is a big one, it's future-proofing, right? What makes a system get old? All of the organizations have massive legacy systems, and they don't want to create another legacy system. So you can say, well, by having separate microservices, I'm able to cut away the pieces where open source is out-competing me. There's many others, right? But articulating it and figuring out just the one thing, because there's about 10, but 10 is too complex. What is the one or two things that the organization really cares about? For us, it's at our maturity level, it's one is faster feature development right now, and two is legacy future-proofing. Eventually, they'll care about all of the rest, like the ability to scale much more incrementally and service our clients kind of in the economics of it, which are also, to your point, much, much cheaper. But it's kind of the what's in it for them, figuring it out, and then just hammering the same points until they're clearly understood, I think, is super important.
So once you've made this argument and someone gives you a few $1 million to go play with, how do you find the talent? Like, do you nurture it internally? Do you grab it from the outside? Do you rent it? So maybe Pascal, you can.
We actually had and still have quite a big challenge on talent. How do you actually show to the outside world that a travel company can be interesting to work for, and that we have some nice projects going on that you can play with the latest technology? And I was actually a bit surprised that when we started this at Thomas Cook, that even our own developers were not the ones who were saying, "Oh, we don't want this. We want to keep doing what we're doing because what we're doing is good." So how actually the biggest problem is, how do you advocate actually the new ways of working? How do you show the benefits to the people who are going to do it on the ground in a daily basis? And therefore we started with a few people which we took off the existing teams. We brought a few people in from external and built it up more like a small incubator team, and then slowly added people who were interested to say like, hey, yes, we want to do a bit the same because this looks cool. And we started slowly also presenting what we're doing and communicating around it. And I think you can't force people to just say you have to do it now this way. I think it's much stronger if you get people behind you and say like, yes, we want to do this all together because we want to be better than what was there in first instance.
Yeah, I'm going to change the question Travell mentioned operations, and so maybe Amit, you can talk about kind of just other parts of the IT organization and what you need from them to be successful.
All right, can I answer briefly the first question as well? Well, one of the pieces I think is...
You can't stop him. Go for it.
You build an awesome lab on the 4th and 5th floor of a building where then you hold really nice conferences. Then you come to these conferences and you share with a really talented group of developers that you're different. And you invite them to go up to the 4th and 5th floor, and you're invited to see what we're doing and see that when you go there, it's not going to be anywhere near what you think of ADP. And then if you're interested, you invite them to email me or our next speaker to explore more. That's one of the ways you do it. There's a lot more to it, but I think worth answering that question. What you need from everyone else, that's a tough one. It depends on the type of company you are. But I think you need to create the sensation, and I know McKinsey likes to call it the burning platform. I think that's where it starts. The fact that the world around us is changing, the velocity of things that are happening is unbelievably fast. Software is eating the world, it's eating the data center, it's eating the the business aspect. Every company is a technology company, and you need to create that urgency in the rest of the business. Then I think you need to split your business apart to the ones who are supporters and the ones who will never be supporters. And you need to focus on the ones that are supporters. You won't get everyone on board this crazy ride because what's happening in the technology landscape is unprecedented. It's crazy. And if you're not part of that craziness, you could look at it from the side and say it's crazy. So I don't think you'll bring everyone on the train with you day one. But you need to realize who are your supporters and then nurture them, bring them in, invite them to be part of this crazy ride. And then you need to tell the other groups or get the executive sponsor to give you leeway from needing to engage with every other team because you'll be drowned in endless number of meetings where, like you said, I agree with you, you don't get to tell people to do this. You get to spark the idea and then be excited about this. So I think that's the starting point for that.
Yeah, but I think it's not only a technology thing. There is a massive change also from the business sides and how you interact with the business and bringing technology closer to the business, but also bring business closer to technology. And I think we always try to do only the way is bring technology closer to the business, but we always forget to bring the business closer to technology. And I think that's also education, and that's also about bringing the right people forward in the organization who can advocate it on the right platforms and be a speaker when there are business meetings going on or when there is a big business event. And so it's bringing things together. We're gluing things together, and that's how you make things work.
I guess I would, try to speak directly to the people in the audience. The business also has a habit, or the industry has a habit of paying for the same thing, every couple of years, 5 years, 10 years. So, how many people know what SOAP is and XML? How many people implemented SOA at their company? All right, so I got a few hands. So it's the core tenets of microservices and stuff like that are well baked into the enterprise. I mean, at Fidelity, frankly, microservices is how we've been doing things for quite a while because we had SOA initiatives, and at State Street we had huge SOA initiatives, in Java and with JBoss and things like that, over a decade ago. So you can do this, and I think it's really just. I think microservices in general is just a culmination of many different things that are happening in the industry. Once again, I will reiterate that the person that you have to convince is, convincing your lead business guys, the CEO, the person that works for the CEO, VP of sales, all those people, that you can just say, hey, we're going to get it to you, 2x or 1.5x faster. It's going to make a lot of things easier. They're going to love it. That's going to be easy. It's going to be the real stakeholder in the room that's may have misgivings, or the people that are really going to have to up their game if they haven't already, is going to be your head of your head of operations, your VP of operations. That type of person, his team, those are the people that are really going to have to step up the game. You're going to have the formation of teams that never existed before in your organization. Before it was, microservices, really, you would have application teams and operations. You give them a bundle, they put on a bunch of machines behind a load balancer. Those days are kind of over. Like, it's going to require platform engineering teams. So basically, I had a platform engineering team. There's a platform engineering team at Netflix. There's a platform engineering team at PayPal. Basically, you can't do what these companies do. You can hear them talk, but until you actually form core engineering teams that can make the lives of both operations, the people that manage the boxes, and the application teams, the people who are implementing business functionality, that platform engineering team is going to be the group that kind of creates the fabric for innovation and basically delivery. So that really is the change. That is the change for microservices. That's what makes it different than SOA. If you look at SOA, you're basically deploying these services as applications using standard old school stuff. And really what you see now in terms of platform engineering, it's going to sort of ubiquitous clusters where it's more about process scheduling and things like that, and multiple versions running and pushing from the command line right on your laptop. Security, how do you keep things agile, right, for the application teams and secure, but change tickets and things like that, those can't really exist in a microservices world if you're talking about multiple deployments a day. So that's a material difference, right, between how we used to do things in an enterprise, where the installs used to take multiple days, and now we're talking about deployments that happen multiple times in a single day.
Fantastic. So let me, I'm going to ask one more question up here, but if you guys can just think of, if you have questions microphones should be around somewhere. So I'm going to maybe ask Amit, how are you dealing with the challenge of operations?
We have some of our operations folks in the crowd here, which is fantastic. I'm so glad to see them here. And I think our approach, some agree with it, some don't, is we're first going to the cloud because we're not in a production environment. We have no clients that will yell and scream if something goes down. So we're first going to the cloud because there's a lot of learning we need to do on our own. And we just need to iterate very, very quickly. And as we learn and we settle, then we will go back and start establishing that group internally, because you do, as you mature and you reach market, you do want to have professionals running this for you. I don't think you want to run it yourself in a more amateurish way for a long time, but the lack of knowledge up front is actually helpful because you iterate very, very quickly. So that's the approach we're starting to take. Some of it is more successful, some of it less, but I think it's kind of diverging a little bit and then coming back together once we mature a slight bit and understand our own infrastructure as software internally. That's our approach.
So questions from the audience?
Question from, so you talk about no change, right? So is Fidelity audited on some of those processes or procedures? So my question to Travell is you talk about no changes, right? Because you're deploying at a rapid rate. So did you automate some of that behind the scenes where it's, it's just a click of a button and change control opens and a lot of stuff's happening behind the scenes? So how do you handle if you do get audited from a process perspective, how do you handle that?
Right, so obviously
Travell, just to repeat the question, just to make sure everyone gets the question.
Sure, so he's basically asking, in a mode where you're doing continuous delivery, how does that impact auditing? And I guess the simple answer is that all systems are audited, regardless of how many clicks it takes. And so, and from a review perspective, as long as you have a trail, you're good. That basic requirement hasn't changed. You can see the enterprise's impact on companies like AWS. I think at the last reInvent, 2 reInvents ago, they announced CloudTrail, which is basically a full audit of everything that happens from a change perspective in AWS. And that was because of the interaction, not with the startups, but from large financial firms and others with regulatory requirements. And so that's how those features emerged.
So just maybe on follow up to that. So you say you eliminate the model change process where the change is open, it goes through certain approvals, and then the change happens days later. So you had that process, and then when you went to microservices, that basically was eliminated.
Right. So when you look at like a deployment might take a couple of days, you're actually producing less change tickets and audit events. When you look at an automated process, you're actually producing more data because more things are automated and things are chunked down into smaller bits. But it's all tracked one way or the other.
More questions over here, maybe?
Hi. So when companies transitioning from a monolithic structure to a microservice way of development, there are certain roles like quality assurance or quality engineering. Do you see in your transition that is it obsolete or it stays the way it is, or it is enhanced, or the role or the day-to-day life, just for example, quality assurance get changed? How do you see it?
I could just answer this really quickly and then go to others. From a quality perspective, the role definitely does change. When people say software is eating the world, well, the thing that actually happens before that is more people are becoming developers. So traditional roles like user experience, UXD, will always remain the same and be very important as stakeholders within providing solution to customers. But from a quality perspective, absolutely people will have to, there's going to be more automation, and there are more tools to automate the process to basically smoke test deliveries.
So I think automation, by the sounds of it, is taking over from the ops world, and it's impacting quality. Thomas Cook, maybe you want to share what you're doing with quality there?
Yeah, I first want to pick in on something else on the role changes. I think
you
also
can change it. You can pick your own questions.
Yeah, sorry. Actually, from an enterprise architecture point of view, there is also a lot of things changing because you have to bring them on board. And actually, there is not like an enterprise architecture cell anymore. The enterprise architects are sitting more and much closer to developers again, and developers are becoming more and more architects, and that becomes one layer because you have to know what you're doing, because if you do something, it might have a massive impact immediately on your production system. So I think there, from a skill set perspective, there is definitely a big difference also in the way you do testing. Everything what's manual should be considered as evil when you do microservices, because it's all about the automation, and it should be raising immediately a big red flag when you have to do a manual action somewhere. And that's how you actually also ensure that quality, because if you automate it, you can measure it and you can baseline it and go further with it.
And I have a similar perspective. I think the enforcement of quality, given the pace of change, is moving much, much closer to the users. So you do dark deployments to a small population of your user base, and you see what happens. And so quality, everyone owns it, and you might have experts on each team. The question is, when do you enforce it? I think if you can, you create the infrastructure and architecture to allow you to do it with their customers by deploying to a small portion, because that's the fastest mechanism, and you can manage risk by only going to a small population of your users, and you don't have to try and simulate your user base with performance scenarios, which is a very hard thing to do if you can use your actual user base. And then if you can assign some clients who you work closely with and react better to issues and outages, then you use them. And I think that's where it's going. I think using real-world clients and real-world users to enforce your quality is the only thing that will keep up with the rate of deployment eventually.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I just want to add on that. Basically, feature flags and deploying to cohorts is like everything. If you have mission critical, if you have a mission critical enterprise experience, something that can't go down, you absolutely you'll find that feature flags is pretty much the only way that this is going to work, as opposed to basically doing quarterly releases.
We have time for 2 more questions, so
remember you got to ask the survey.
3 questions.
Right.
You're going to ask the 3rd question to the audience. Should we go over here to the middle, and then we'll do over the other side.
Hi, I had two questions actually. So, so the first thing
Four
is
questions.
first thing is around based on what you had explained. Does the DevOps model becomes an absolute necessity to implement microservices? And the second question is, the more I hear about microservices, I feel like this is more of a bunch of fine-grained services, and you still need a composite service or a business service which would orchestrate all these services together. So where do we see the advantage of writing more fine-grained microservices when you need to have a business service which can kind of orchestrate all these together?
So let me just split. I think the first part of the question was, is DevOps a prerequisite? I'm going to let Amit answer that one, and then
Yes.
we'll go to the second question to go ahead.
I think the answer is yes. I just don't see any other way aside working extremely closely. And I think you want the mindset of development is, if it's manual, I'm going to try and automate it. And then once I automated it, I'm going to look at the next manual thing and try and automate that. And to me, that is a summary of DevOps. As infrastructure is becoming software, then you can write software to manage the infrastructure better. So I just don't see another way. As you increase the maturities, and for some of your systems, you might have more automated approaches, different types of automated approaches, but I do think it's a prerequisite to do it well, because otherwise you'll get stuck in the basics rather than actually be focused on developing more software.
And I think the second part was just, is microservice just a finer grained version of SOA? And don't you still need all the orchestration and all that stuff above it the same way you needed it for SOA?
I think at the core ops level, to enable basically, taking that infrastructure and making it code, ops is going to have to undergo a transformation. They have to get away from just like machines and load balancers. They're going to have to bring in something like Mesosphere or something like Docker, others at a bare minimum. Else nothing's going to get done. Like they'll try and it'll flail and it'll waste time. Basically, there are some minimum prerequisites, more than it'll take longer than the time we have, but there are definitely minimum prerequisites for operationalizing a microservices strategy.
So one more question on that side, yeah. And then Travell's question.
Do you feel it's important for as a microservice architecture develops and you kind of split a monolithic application into its various domains, do you think the interaction with the stakeholders also needs to evolve and split, the domains of a single stakeholder into multiple stakeholders? Or how do you kind of convince the stakeholders to think about how the feature or whatever request they have is going to be implemented, and how does that sort of interaction evolve as you go to a microservices architecture?
Pascal, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, actually, we're bringing indeed the business closer with our verticals, and we try to have an end-to-end responsibility. So if I'm searching for a product, that's a total different requirement than I'm actually booking a holiday, or when I'm already booked something and I want to do some up and cross-selling around it. That's also a different functionality. And by having those vertical teams in place and make them end-to-end responsible, that's one. But you still have to create some kind of a scrum of scrums to bring those different entities together, because if they don't talk to each other, you end up with silos. And that's a risk which you have to take in consideration from the beginning, that you don't create new silos. Because instead of creating silos from ops to DBAs, developers, and everything, you start creating different silos. So it's very important to take that in consideration from the beginning.
Amit, Travell, do you want to take a shot at that?
Sure.
I just think if you can connect the business to the developers actually working on the features they care about, you create magic. Because developers, we all know, smart people, they understand the business. It's much easier that way than trying to get people who are not technologists to understand technology. And when you build something, you understand the domain. So connect people directly to the end developer creates huge value for both sides. The developers see the tone of discussion, the urgency, the business value, and then the business person, if it's a sales guy, it's a marketing guy, it's just a general executive who runs the call center, can finally get to talk to someone who understands and cares about what he's talking about. So I think there's magic if you do the connection well.
Yeah, what you're saying is make the business successful and you're successful too.
So we're going to wrap this up. I think we're over time already. So the last question is actually a question Travell wants to ask you guys. So
Sure.
stage is yours.
So I'm going to ask the question. But I did want to frame some of the stuff that was said here. And I realized it's just listening to you guys just now, but a lot of the challenges that I talked about are if you're trying to do this stuff on-prem. If you can convince your business to go to the cloud first, focus on that, because cloud enablement, microservices in cloud enablement go hand in hand like peanut butter and jelly. So if you can, disregard everything I said and just go to Amazon or Azure or something. Seriously. And so the question I had is actually for people who are doing microservices in the enterprise, and this is about machine-to-machine authentication and basically securing microservices. So I just wanted to take a quick show of hands, and even if it's not microservices, it's just SOA. Just by show of hands, like how many people have no form of authentication for their back-end services, and it's just network-based, like by IP or by firewall rules or stuff like that.
So by APIs or just back-end calls?
Everything's behind the firewall, so just behind the firewall.
For a lot of the legacy systems, yeah.
So just no straight.
Behind the firewall, it's all straight calls.
All
From
trusted.
over there too.
All trusted.
Show of hands.
Yeah, show of hands. So all trusted network, no security, or additional security. All right. How many people do some type of protocol level lockdown like SSH or SSL with some form of authentication? Okay. And lastly, how many people do something more sophisticated like OAuth 2, behind the firewall? Okay, great.
I think it was the same count for all three, right?
It's very
10.
It's very even, yes.
So guys, thank you very much, and great having you around. If you guys have questions with these guys will be around for the next few minutes, so thank you.